The midday sun beat down on the sprawling parking lot of the Megamart, turning the black asphalt into a shimmering heat haze. Cars glinted like beetles, and the air was thick with the smell of hot concrete and distant exhaust. It was a typical Saturday, chaotic and loud. At the entrance, two security guards, Leo and Mike, leaned against their podium, boredom etched into their faces. Leo, the senior of the two, fanned himself with a clipboard. Mike, younger and with a swagger born of a uniform that felt like power, scanned the crowds with a jaded eye. Their job was mostly theater, directing lost shoppers, and occasionally checking a receipt. The woman who approached didn't fit any of their usual profiles. She was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, with a calm, purposeful stride that cut through the meandering flow of customers. Then her clothes were simple. Dark, well-fitting jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and practical hiking boots. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense ponytail. She carried a large, sturdy canvas tote bag, its contents seemingly full but not bulging. There was an aura of quiet efficiency about her, a straight-backed posture that suggested discipline, not threat. She gave a slight, polite nod to Leo as she moved to pass the security gate. "Hold up, ma'am," Mike said, stepping forward, his voice laced with a boredom he tried to mask as authority. He'd had a long morning of ignoring actual shoplifters because the paperwork was a hassle, but something about her unassuming confidence irked him. "Store policy, gotta check bags over a certain size." The woman stopped, turning her clear, steady gaze on him. "Of course," she said, her voice low and even. She placed the tote on the podium without fuss. Leo, feeling the heat and wanting no conflict, waved a hand. "Ah, it's fine, Mike. Let the lady through." But Mike was already unzipping the main compartment. He wanted to see what was inside that made her walk like she owned the place. He began pulling items out with more theatricality than necessary, laying them on the podium for the world to see. A first aid kit, compact but professional-looking, far more advanced than a standard store-bought one. A multi-tool, a notebook with precise geometric handwriting, a reusable water bottle, a small sealed case he didn't open, and several protein bars. It was the kit of a preparedness enthusiast, nothing more. "Going camping?" Mike asked, a smirk playing on his lips as he held up a carabiner. Something like that," she replied, her expression unreadable. "Thorough," Leo muttered, wanting it over with. Mike, however, wasn't done. He unzipped a smaller front pocket. His fingers brushed against something flat and hard. He pulled out a wallet. Glancing at Leo with a raised eyebrow, he opened it. He flipped past a few credit cards, his eyes scanning for a driver's license. And then he stopped. His smirk froze, then melted away. Nestled behind a clear plastic window was an ID card, but it was like no ID he had ever seen. It was a deep navy blue with a prominent eagle emblem. The photograph was of the woman, her face even more stern in the official picture, and beside it, in bold, authoritative letters, it read, United States Department of the Navy. Below that, on a line that made his blood run cold despite the heat, official credentials. And below her name, which was J. Alvarez, was her rank. Rear Admiral, upper half. Mike's mouth went dry. He fumbled, his fingers clumsy, and a second card slipped from behind the first. This one was simpler, darker, with fewer details, but an even more ominous weight. It bore the seal of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and identified her as a member of the Naval Special Warfare Command. The acronym seemed to burn into his retina, NSWC, the parent command of the SEAL teams. A choked sound escaped Mike's throat. Leo, noticing his partner's sudden pallor, leaned over. "What? What is it?" His own eyes widened as he took in the cards. The air around their little podium seemed to grow still and silent, the cacophony of the parking lot fading into a distant buzz. The woman, Admiral Alvarez, merely watched. She hadn't moved. Her hands were relaxed at her sides, but her eyes, which had been calm, were now like chips of flint, taking in every micro-expression of panic on the young guard's face. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The evidence was in Mike's trembling hands. Mike's mind raced, a frantic scramble of memories from his own brief, uneventful stint in the Army Reserves. He knew what those credentials meant. This wasn't just a high-ranking officer. This was a warfighter of the highest order, a person who had likely commanded the most elite special operations forces on the planet. And he had just publicly rifled through her personal belongings with the disdain of a mall cop. Ma'am, Admiral, The words died in his throat. He tried to shove the items back into her bag, and his movements jerky and apologetic. The professional first aid kit, the notebook, everything was stuffed back in a disordered heap. "Is there a problem, officer?" Her voice was still quiet, but it now carried the weight of a glacier, calm and immense. Leo found his voice first, professionalism crashing over his initial shock. "No, ma'am. No problem at all, Admiral. Our deepest apologies. We were just following procedure. Stupid procedure. Please, go right ahead." He shot a venomous look at Mike, who was now staring at his own shoes, his face the color of parchment. Admiral Alvarez took her time. She slowly reached out and took the tote bag from Mike's limp hands. She didn't rush to reorganize it. She simply slung it over her shoulder, the gesture effortless. She gave one last, slow look at both men, a look that was neither angry nor vindictive, but profoundly assessing. It was a look that had undoubtedly evaluated battle plans and the mettle of warriors, and now found two security guards severely wanting. Then, without another word, she turned and walked into the cool, fluorescent-lit cavern of the Megamart, disappearing among the aisles of cereal and laundry detergent. For a full minute, neither guard spoke. The weight of their colossal error hung between them in the hot air. "You idiot!" Leo finally hissed, the words bursting out of him. "You had to push it. Go on, search her, you said. You mocked her." Mike could only stare at the spot where she had vanished. "How was I supposed to know?" he whispered, but the question was pathetic. He had been playing a power game, and he had challenged a titan. And the reality of it was settling in his gut like a stone. He had not just inconvenienced a shopper, he had shown profound disrespect to a Navy SEAL admiral. In his world, that felt akin to poking a sleeping dragon with a stick. Back inside the store, Admiral Janessa Jade Alvarez moved with the same purposeful calm. She collected the items on her list: engine oil, a specific type of duct tape, dog food for her retired working Malinois. Her mind, however, was already elsewhere. The incident at the door was a minor irritation, a speck of dust on the lens. She had endured far worse in far more dangerous places, but it served as a reminder of the invisible walls between the world she operated in and the everyday reality of the country she served. She paid for her items, the cashier utterly unaware of the credentials in the wallet she presented. As she loaded the bags into her sturdy, unremarkable SUV, her encrypted phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. A classified notification. A situation was developing. Her leave, already shorter than planned, was effectively over. She started the vehicle. The clean, efficient purr of the engine, a familiar comfort. She allowed herself one glance in the rearview mirror, not at her own reflection, but at the Megamart entrance now receding into the distance. A small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Then she pulled out into traffic, her focus already shifting to the encrypted briefing awaiting her, the mundane world of the parking lot fading behind her like a dream. Leo and Mike's shift ended in a cloud of grim silence. The story, however, it did not end with them. Mike, in a state of nervous guilt, had mentioned the unbelievable encounter to his cousin over text. His cousin, a blogger for a local news site with a knack for sensationalism, saw not a lesson in humility, but a viral story. He pressed Mike for details, for a description of the woman, for a confirmation of the credentials. Mike, seeking some weird form of absolution or perhaps wanting to share the burden of his shock, gave vague but confirmatory answers. The blog post went up at midnight. The title was pure clickbait. Mega Mart guard harasses shopper, discovers she's a top-secret Navy admiral. It was light on verified facts, but heavy on dramatic speculation. It mentioned the SEAL connection, the Joint Chiefs ID. It was shared, commented on, and picked up by larger aggregator sites by dawn. By midday Sunday, and the story was trending locally, it hit the national feeds by evening. News vans, smelling a human interest story with a heavy dose of patriotism and schadenfreude, descended on the Megamart parking lot. Reporters thrust microphones at confused shoppers. They tried to get a statement from the store's terrified manager, who had no idea what protocol covered an incident involving a special warfare admiral. The regional corporate office went into damage control lockdown. Lawyers were called. Statements were drafted and scrapped. The dilemma was immense. Apologize to the admiral and admit the guards acted inappropriately, potentially opening themselves to lawsuit, or defend their employees and risk the wrath of both public opinion and, terrifyingly, the United States Navy. And the phrase public relations nightmare was used in every emergency meeting. Meanwhile, in a nondescript government building in Virginia, in a secure conference room that smelled of stale coffee and urgency, Admiral Alvarez was in the final hours of a complex operational briefing. One of her aides, a sharp-eyed lieutenant commander, quietly slid a tablet across the polished table to her. On it was a news article, the headline blazing. She skimmed it, her expression not changing by a single muscle. A faint, tired sigh escaped her nose. She handed the tablet back. "This is a distraction," she said, her voice cutting through the tactical discussion. "Ignore it. It's noise." But the Navy could not ignore it. The Office of Public Affairs, monitoring the story's meteoric rise, saw a potential problem. An admiral of the Naval Special Warfare Command, a figure whose public profile was deliberately kept low for operational security, was now the subject of supermarket tabloid-style speculation. The blog post had included a physical description accurate enough to be concerning. More troubling were the comment sections and social media threads, where armchair investigators were now trying to piece together her identity, her career, her family. The initial internal reaction was one of fury. The thought of a rear admiral, a decorated leader, being subjected to a petty bag search was an insult to the institution. A call was placed from a very high-ranking number at the Pentagon to the Megamart corporate headquarters. The conversation was brief and one-sided, and the corporate executives on the call later described it as the most politely terrifying 5 minutes of their careers. No threats were made. No demands were issued. The sheer silent weight of the institution on the other end of the line was pressure enough. By Monday morning, a formal, groveling public apology was issued by Megamart's CEO. It expressed profound regret for the unfortunate and disrespectful incident, emphasized the company's deep respect for all members of the armed services, and announced that the employees involved had been reassigned pending a full review. The news cycle chewed on this for another day, but in a secure office at the Naval Base Coronado, the real assessment was taking place. Admiral Alvarez sat across from a captain from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, and a worried public affairs officer. "The concern, Admiral," the PAO said carefully, "is the OPSEC exposure. The description is out there, the confirmation of your presence in that area at that time, the mention of your association with NSWC. It creates a mosaic." Jade Alvarez leaned back. "The mosaic was already there for anyone sophisticated enough to look," she said, her tone practical. "This just added a brightly colored tile in a public place, an annoying one but not a critical one. My concern isn't for me." She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto the PAO. My concern is the precedent. This wasn't about me. It was about the uniform, the service, that those young men felt they could mock. That's the virus. The story is just a symptom. The NCIS agent nodded. The guards have no malicious intent, just stupidity. The blogger, however, he pushed for details he shouldn't have. We'll have a word with him about responsible reporting and national security. Do it quietly, Alvarez said. I don't want a martyr. I want this to fade. She stood up, ending the meeting. The lesson isn't for Megamart or the internet. The lesson is for every person who thinks a uniform, or the lack of one, tells the whole story. You never know who someone is. A little respect costs nothing. A week later, the news vans were gone. The blog post, after a quiet conversation between NCIS and the site's editors, was updated with a less sensational headline and a note clarifying that the Admiral's specific duties were private for security reasons. Then the internet moved on to the next scandal. On a cool Tuesday evening, Admiral Alvarez, once again in civilian clothes, found herself needing a specific electrical part. The nearest store that carried it was, inconveniently, the same Megamart. She considered driving the extra 20 miles to another chain, then dismissed the thought. Avoiding it would give the place a power it did not deserve. She parked in a different row and walked towards the entrance. The same podium stood there. A new, older guard was there, a man with a veteran's bearing and calm eyes. He saw her approach, and recognition flashed in his gaze. Not from the news, but from the way she carried herself. He gave a small, respectful nod. Evening, ma'am, he said, his voice neutral and professional. She returned the nod. Good evening. As she passed, and the guard spoke again, softly. It's an honor to have you here. She paused, turning her head slightly. She saw no mockery in his face, no fear, just a simple, earned respect. She gave a slight, genuine smile, the first anyone at that store had ever seen from her. Thank you. She completed her purchase without incident. On her way out, she saw Mike. He was no longer in a security uniform. He was wearing a store vest, pushing a long line of shopping carts across the lot. He saw her, flinched, and looked away quickly, his shoulders hunched. The store's review had resulted in a very visible demotion. She walked to her car, the electrical part in a small bag. The episode was closed. For the world, it was a fleeting story of comeuppance. For Mike, it was a life-altering lesson in hubris. For the new guard, and it was a reminder to trust his instincts about character. For Admiral Alvarez, it was a brief, inconvenient return to a world obsessed with surfaces, a reminder of why she preferred the deep, shadowed waters where true substance was the only currency that mattered. She drove home, the lights of the city reflecting in her rearview mirror, already thinking ahead to the next real challenge, leaving the Megamart and its small dramas firmly in the past.